especially because you hear so many more birds than you see. So now you know what you're hearing.
That's awesome. Thank you, Izzy. Thanks for sharing. All right, I'm going to stop screen sharing because we're going to get started. Awesome. So for those of you who are just joining, welcome. If you can if you're able to turn on your cameras, but keep yourself muted, that's awesome. I've pinned the panelists, but it's just really nice for them to see all of your faces and see who is joining us today. So good afternoon. I really hope that everyone's doing well and having an excellent first week with your host sites. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the first of our summer 2022 alumni webinar series. So today is the first of 4 alumni webinars taking place over the course of the summer. As we may have more than just our fellows joining us today, I want to introduce myself. My name is Alexis Dwyer. I am the Program and Network Stewardship Coordinator at the UNH Sustainability Institute. And I'm delighted to have you all joining us today and for our panelists joining us as well. So the webinar series really is a key program element of our Sustainability Fellowship, a paid summer program that connects high achieving undergraduate and post-baccalaureate students with organizations to work on high impact sustainability initiatives. So our goal for the webinar series is to provide valuable insight into the field of sustainability for our current fellows, help you all build your professional networks, connect with program alumni, and ultimately, hopefully help you navigate into your career options after this. So we are also pleased to be perhaps joined by some other groups today. Students from the UNH Changemaker Fellows Program were invited, our cohort-based program at UNH, which connects students interested in sustainability from their freshman through senior year with like-minded peers and staff and faculty support. And we also may be joined from some of our UNH sustainability alumni from other programs through our LinkedIn group. So without further ado, we're really excited to kick this off. I would just like to introduce our moderator for the session, Dr. Cameron Wake. Dr. Wake is a research professor at the Institute for the Study of Earth, Oceans, and Space at the University of New Hampshire. He is also the Josephine A. Lamprey Professor in Climate and Sustainability at the UNH Sustainability Institute. Cameron leads a climate change research program, lectures widely on climate change, serves as the program chair for the UNH Sustainability Dual Major, and supports regional collaborative efforts to build resilient, low carbon communities. He is also a member of the leadership team for UNH Arctic and serves as chair of the Kittery, Maine Climate Adaptation Committee. And then of course, for the Sustainability Fellowship, he serves as an integral program advisor and group advisor to the Resilience and Research Group. All right, take it away, Cameron.
Thank you so much, Alexis, and great to see all those faces out there. I was really sorry not to join you at orientation this year. I did, however, have a blast helping organize and participate in an International University of the Arctic meeting that we hosted in Portland, Maine, where we're really trying to focus resources on research and education in the Arctic. So we don't do to the Arctic what we've done essentially to the rest of the world except Antarctica. And interestingly, I'm taking a lot of lessons that I've learned from this program and thinking about how we organize our UNH Arctic program. So welcome today. Again, great to see you all out there. And today our webinar is really focused on resilience and public policy. So we often talk about resilience in terms of how we adapt to our changing climate. And it's been a really important discussion in our transition of addressing climate change. Sort of 2 to 3 decades ago, we focused mostly on mitigation, which was reducing our emissions of greenhouse gases. And now we've actually realized that we have to learn how to walk and chew gum at the same time. We significantly have to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions while at the same time adapting to the change that we're already committed to. And that change is going to continue even if we significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions for the next 2 to 3 decades. So we really have to focus on this issue. And I do like a term that there's many different definitions of resilience. There's a new one that I like that sort of is a twist on Joe Biden's program, but a lot of people talk about resilience as bouncing back. And I think many of us in the community are thinking about bouncing back better. So as we deal with these issues of climate change, how is it that we not only deal with the physical challenge, but also promote things like environmental justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion, affordable housing? How do we do it better in the future? So one of the ways to build resilience is through public policy. You can think about changing practice as well. You can think about businesses doing it. You can think about engaging in it individually. But today we're really taking the perspective with our panelists of sort of municipalities and county governments and what they're doing in their particular realm. So we've got 4 speakers today. I'm just going to introduce them briefly. You have their bios. I'm not going to read them at length. We've got Alexandra Dupre here. She was a 2020 fellow. She actually worked with me in Kittery, and she's now entering a new position as an urban planner in her county in Maryland. So she might talk about that, but she might also talk about her work as a climate change adaptation consultant in Washington, D.C. We've got Jackson Kaspari, who's rocking the mustache, resilience coordinator for the city of Dover in New Hampshire, and also was a PhD student with a colleague of mine. So I've known Jackson for a while. We've also got Andrea Scarfo, who's a zero waste outreach and communications coordinator in the City of Boston's Waste Reduction Department of Public Works. And she was a 2020 graduate of the Sustainability Dual Major. I should say Jackson was a 2018 fellow. And then last but certainly not least, we have John Gagne, who currently works for the Greater Portland Council of Governments as a sustainability program associate, where he's responsible for coordinating technical assistance to member cities and towns for sustainability initiatives and supporting the municipal climate action planning program. So really actually a nice range of people working in the municipal and county level. And what I want to start off with is just to have each introduce themselves, and let's go in that order: Alex, Jackson, Andrea, and then John, and just talk a little bit more in detail about your professional roles now and what you're doing in your job. And we'll get to the issue of resilience and public policy in our next set of questions. I'll also add, if you have a question, drop it in the chat box. I'll go through sort of with a few rounds of questions, and then we'll open it up to all of you to ask some questions. So Alex, so nice to see you again after so long. Take it away.
I know, it's so nice to see you too. And so, yeah, I guess you gave me the introduction, but I'm happy to talk a little bit more. So I did work for a pretty large international consultant in Washington, D.C. once I finished my master's program. It was focused, the role was focused mostly on climate resilience from the approach of adaptation, but I also did some mitigation work. So it was a lot of approaches that focused on engineering, maybe policy, urban planning, ordinances, zoning, but also some nature-based solutions were integrated into some of our projects. So we worked a lot with local governments, state governments, and federal agencies like USDA, National Park Service, USAID. And then I left that position in December because I didn't feel that consulting was really the best fit for me. And I'm always happy to talk about transitioning out of a job and how that can be really difficult. But I have since been interviewing at a lot of different organizations that are mostly government and nonprofits. And actually in every single one of my interviews, and I've probably had around like 10 or so, I have talked about my fellowship with UNH, and it's been applicable across the board, which is really great. And so I have recently been offered, and I'm hoping to start a position with the county government in Maryland soon, where I'm going to be working as an urban planner with them.
Great, thanks, Alex. Jackson, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Cameron. And it's great to see all of you. This is such an awesome program. So you have an exciting summer ahead. And I can talk a bit more about, what I do kind of broadly, and then certainly highlight some specifics later on. So I'm the resilience coordinator and assistant city planner for the city of Dover, New Hampshire. And how I got connected with this role is when I was a fellow, I did my fellowship with the planning department in Dover and completed a carbon and nitrogen footprint report. And that led into an opportunity for me to serve as a member of Dover's planning board while I was, a graduate student, still am a graduate student at UNH. And so with my role in the department, I'm focused on a lot of issues related to resilience. Obviously, that's a pretty broad category, but I mainly kind of engage in three major areas, being energy, land conservation and monitoring, and then environmental review for projects. So that's assessing our current environmental conditions and also assessing, environmental impacts for projects that are coming to town. We've seen a huge urban boom here in Dover, so that's been a really important consideration. And as part of that, I'm the staff liaison between, the Planning Community Development Department and some of our commissions and committees here in Dover. So the Energy Commission, the Conservation Commission, and the Open Lands Committee. And I really enjoy that work because it's an awesome way to get involved with engaged citizens who are motivated, trying to make things happen and bring a whole range of different backgrounds to the table. So that's been super cool. And before, being in this position, there was no resilience coordinator role for Dover. So I've been able to kind of define it over time, which has been a really neat experience. And as such, I've become sort of the point person for sustainability and resilience. And that's neat because I'm able to consistently coordinate with people across the board internally here in Dover, also with, state agencies and regionally with other municipal stakeholders. So I'm involved with a lot of different organizations that are all dedicated to sustainability and resilience. For example, I'm the Community Power Coalition in New Hampshire alternate director for Dover. I'm involved with the Coastal Adaptation Work Group, the New England Municipal Sustainability Network, and like an SRPC or a regional committee involved with resilience. So interfacing with all of these different people that are focused sort of on the same thing has been really neat. And I think you'll find a lot of rewarding experience from being a cohort of fellows and supporting each other in the work you do this summer.
Thanks, Jackson. So many questions for you, actually, but they'll come later. Andrea, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea, and I graduated from UNH with a dual major in economics and sustainability in 2020, which I can't believe was a couple of years ago now. It's pretty crazy. And after graduating, I decided to move down to Boston with not much of a plan in mind. It was an uncertain time because I was graduating like in the middle of the pandemic, or in the early, what we thought was the middle of the pandemic, but then it went on for a really long time. And I didn't have a job lined up, and I was moving to a new city, and I had a couple of months of rent saved up from working through college. And I did not quite know what to do, but I knew the pandemic was causing a lot of people to experience food insecurity, especially in cities and in Boston. So I decided that I wanted to do something that would help others. And I started working for a nonprofit organization called Fresh Truck. And we provide fresh, affordable foods and vegetables to communities in Boston in a big green bus that I was driving, which was also crazy. And it was outfitted as a mobile market. So I was doing that job and I had an amazing experience, but I really wanted to get back to sustainability, which is what I majored in college. And I was working at Fresh Truck and still sort of had my eye out for a sustainability job. And I ended up seeing the job posting for the outreach and communications coordinator with the city of Boston. And I applied and I got the job, which is awesome. And I'm telling you this because I feel like I'm probably closest to you guys out of the other panelists. And I just want you guys to know that even if you're not sure what to do after college, like, and you don't think that you're ending up in like the field you want to be in, you can still have a switch and just try to stay positive, and keep looking, and good things will happen. So now I'm the outreach and communications coordinator for the city of Boston in the Waste Reduction Department of Public Works. And waste reduction is responsible for all of the waste collection in the city of Boston, including trash, recycling, food waste composting, leaf and yard waste composting, and more. In 2019, the city released its zero waste plan, which outlined the city's strategy to reduce our waste by 80% by 2035. And in order to achieve this lofty goal, in October of 2022, the city hired on my manager and myself as the small zero waste team. And in the 6 months since we have been hired in the waste reduction department, we've launched a textile recycling home pickup program, expanded our food waste drop-off locations, collaborated with Boston Farmers Markets to start a program where people can drop off their food waste at their local farmers market while they're shopping for fresh produce. And then the farmers actually take it back to their farm and use it, which I think is really cool because it really shows people like the full cycle of food waste and how it can be used by someone that they actually know, and sort of makes it more personal, which is really exciting. And also I created the Boston Reuse and Donation Directory. There wasn't really something that existed like that before, but I think that it's important for people to have the opportunity to either reuse or donate before recycling or putting something in the trash, obviously. So that's just to help people with that. And we just recently launched curbside collection of food waste, which is a huge deal and really, really exciting. And for all of those things in my role, I've been spearheading community outreach and communications. I created some advertising campaigns with like billboards and like the sides of buses for recycling education. I wrote our boston.gov web pages, and I like rewrote and redesigned all the printed materials in our office that we send out to Boston residents. And also I go out and talk to residents, which is my favorite part of my job. And actually something that I got experience from at Fresh Truck, because I was managing markets and talking to a ton of people every day and sort of letting them know about our services. And even though I never really thought I'd be working for Fresh Truck, it helped get my job in sustainability, which is where I really wanted to be. So just don't say no to opportunities. And if you feel like you're not going in the right direction, know that you can always get an opportunity that'll take you there.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Andrea. You covered my questions at the end, sort of excellent advice. You know, I just want to say, so you graduated in 2020. It hasn't taken you that long to really land on your feet and find a great fit.
Yeah, I was not expecting it. So, it's great.
All right, and last but not least, over to you, John.
Hey everybody, I'm John. I'm currently a Sustainability Program Associate at the Greater Portland Council of Governments. I graduated kind of in the middle of the 2019-2020 year, and then I briefly worked at the Sustainability Institute, and I was also a changemaker coach, specifically because of this program. So I will say this is like one of the most amazing experiences you can have as an undergrad and even a grad student. And whenever I have had interviews in the past, this is a program that everybody asks about. So feel confident in the experience that you're gaining from this and know that it's definitely a door opener in the future. I sort of was in an interesting situation too with COVID happening. I'd already graduated. I was kind of figuring out where I wanted to go. And I found an internship after I graduated, which I didn't even know was possible. So I interned at Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission as a sustainability and transportation intern. And that kind of opened the door of sort of the nonprofit regional sustainability practices that happen in the state of Maine. And from there, I went on to the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and I've been there for about 8 months now. And in the sustainability team, we do a broad range of things, mostly on climate action planning. And then the other hat that we wear is part of this National Clean Cities organization, which is funded by the Department of Energy. And it is a massive organization that works to reduce the use of petroleum in our transit systems, which is an amazing feat. And I've sort of more gravitated towards that because I think electric vehicles and alternative fuels are super cool. And they're definitely a huge component to building climate resiliency and mitigation of greenhouse gases. So I've kind of step more into that role. So yeah, we're doing some broader work across the Maine's transit agencies, working with the state, working with local municipalities, and then doing transit planning on a broader scale. And we work with partners like CMP, utilities, Efficiency Maine Trust, the governor's office. And yeah, we wear a lot of hats, but that's one of the beautiful things about sustainability. You get to touch on so many different aspects.
Great, thanks, John. So I just want to mention, again, the focus of this is resilience and policy, right? There's many different ways to address resilience, but I would venture to say that we are now living in a golden age for resilience at the municipal level because of all the money that's coming down from the federal government. And, you know, I've never heard this in my lifetime. That I'm hearing from municipal governments now is like, we can't spend the money fast enough, which is music to my ears, or we can't get the grant program off the ground fast enough. And I know that's the case for my role in working on climate adaptation in Kittery. So I think this is a particularly good time to be talking to some people who are sort of working for those governments. So my second round of questions for our panelists is, can you just please sort of provide some comments and your perspective on how you are currently addressing the broad issue of resilience through your policy work or your related work, like Jackson mentioned, sort of building these broader coalitions. And maybe we can go backwards this time and start with you, John. So just really interested, sort of from the perspectives of policy, how are you addressing this big gorilla of a challenge that we call resilience?
Yeah, so it's hard. And one of the things that we're doing is working very closely with a bunch of municipalities to develop their first climate action plan. You know, a lot of municipalities have a short list of projects that they've wanted to accomplish over the past few years and don't really know where to start. And one of the first steps that municipalities can take is to develop a climate action plan. So that can be looking at vulnerability assessments, greenhouse gas emission inventory, developing new policies based on the needs of your town. And there's so many ways to go about resiliency. And one of the big focuses that we're focusing on right now is developing a strong coastal climate resiliency program. So SMPDC, which is the Southern Maine counterpart, and us have been doing a lot of work working with municipalities on how to develop coastal resiliency. How can we help businesses develop strategies and plan for the worst case scenario? There's a lot of data that's been done by the Gulf of Maine Research Institute projecting the water elevation levels and how can we plan for the worst case scenarios. So it's really working with municipalities on setting priorities, developing them, and helping them develop an action plan.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. Planning and having those plans come up from the grassroots being so important. So it's not Augusta that's telling us what to do in the coastal areas. Andrea, can you provide us with your perspective on how you're addressing resilience in Boston?
Yeah, of course. So it's pretty interesting because historically, Public Works has never had any policy people in the whole entire overall Public Works. So me and my manager are the first people considering policy that are in Public Works. Usually, like policies just trickle down from like the mayor's office, and those policies are usually not really made with operations in mind. So sometimes things fall through. Sometimes they're not even possible because the operations people weren't consulted on how it's actually going to happen. So yeah, so it's really awesome to be sitting with Public Works people, working with them every day and have like, how are we going to actually turn this idea of policy that we have into an actual program, into an actual service. So I've learned that to establish successful programs, you need to not only think about the policy, but consider every logistical aspect from like, who's going to pick up this item, who's going to bring the bin to the location, like how are we going to create route density and sort of be more environmental on the amount of like emissions that we're giving out through pickups with trucks and stuff. And so a big positive that has come from our team working with the operations staff in Public Works is that we have the opportunity to really focus on accessibility for all Boston residents. And accessibility has not historically been in the forefront of operations staff's mind in Public Works in the city of Boston, because they just have so many other priorities that they need to figure out to make the service run smoothly. But also historically, in communities of color and immigrant communities are the ones that are most disproportionately affected by waste. So it's really important to have our materials and our services be accessible to people in those communities. So what that looks like on my end is having all of our educational documents translated into the 10 vital languages that are identified in Boston, and making sure that our services can be accessed by people with disabilities or without access to vehicles. And something that we have done like recently for that is starting our textile home pickups, so people don't have to lug a big bag of clothes down to a drop box. It just makes it so much easier for people to make the decision to recycle their textiles instead of just putting them in their trash, if they can just go online and schedule an appointment and someone comes and picks it up for them. And I think that because waste disproportionately affects EJ communities, it's really important that every Bostonian has the opportunity to feel empowered to make good choices with how they reduce their waste. And I think that that is so important to building resilient cities, because it's not going to be a resilient city if only like a third of the population is able to participate and do the waste reduction programs. So that is something that I focus a lot of my efforts on.
Excellent, thank you, Andrea. Yeah, and you're at the end there. You're getting closer to the sort of what's this systematic approach to waste, and you're beginning to work on some components of that. All right, Jackson, over to you.
Sure, thanks. Well, Andrea, I think we should definitely connect regarding waste initiatives, because I'm trying to accomplish some of those things, and I think you've brought a great piece to the puzzle, which is, you know, I totally agree with you. Sometimes policy decisions leave out the folks that I need to carry it out on an operational basis. And my role I've found it's been crucial to bring those folks into the conversation in early stages to make sure like what we're trying to implement on a planning level is actually feasible. And sometimes I come up with something that I think is a great idea, and I go to the director of community services and he has about six ways for why that won't work for his staff, or we don't have the capacity, or so it's trying to find that middle ground of how we can actually make things come to fruition. But one of the things that I'm working on right now is a citywide resilience plan for Dover, and that's going to cover a ton of categories. And it's been really interesting for me because I'm creating this planning document, but I'm also actively trying to implement a lot of things at the same time. So it's balancing planning with making stuff happen. But as planners or being in a planning department, we track our metrics of success through implementation. So we don't want to create these planning documents and have them sit on a shelf or sit somewhere online. We really track our progress by seeing, all right, we've created this document, we had all of this great stakeholder input. How do we make it happen? And how do we make progress to completing the city's vision for where we want to be as a community? And so, I've been engaged with a lot of different stuff to try to make Dover more resilient. I think one of the cooler projects I was involved with is we worked with some folks from UNH Extension and formed an ad hoc committee made up of Conservation Commission members, Energy Commission members, and Planning Board members to identify all of the key climate resources that Dover's had over the past 5 years or so, and create this educational content through 2-page fact sheets and short 3-minute videos for helping to disseminate that information for the general public. And then we also held a climate resources forum for staff and board and commission members where we covered the various climate resources and how they might be able to apply those resources in their work. And it opened up some great discussions between department heads, between folks on committees and commissions, And now they're really engaged with some of that content and trying to bring it to the forefront of what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that was really successful. But some of the other things we're doing in terms of energy, right? We're looking at fleet electrification. You know, so we've just got 2 new electric vehicles for our community services department, and I led a whole RFP process to select a vendor to install our electric vehicle supply equipment and supply that equipment to expand our ability to charge our municipal fleet. And we're looking at opportunities to expand public charging as well, and sort of tracking utilization and trying to spread awareness on electrification, and not just, you know, for personal vehicles, but also what's coming in the future in terms of electric buses, electric public works vehicles. So we're holding, we held an EV show back in November, which was something the Energy Commission promoted, which was pretty successful. And we're planning for another one during Apple Harvest Day, which is really exciting for Dover. That event draws about 60,000 people to the city. So I think that will be a great opportunity to sort of spread awareness on what's coming in terms of transportation and why we need to make this switch to electrification to really, you know, reduce our impacts on local air quality, and then obviously climate change overall. Let's see, my involvement with Community Power Coalition has been pretty exciting. Through that organization, now we're about to surpass 20 municipalities. We're trying to really change the way that communities or municipalities supply electricity to their communities by offering representation for those communities on where the power actually comes from. So through that program, basically, we're looking to provide electricity at a cheaper rate than what's currently being provided by default service. And we'll be able to incorporate more opportunities to collaborate with these municipalities and large renewable projects, whether that's solar or wind farms or anything else, so that we can add a greener mix to the electricity going to the community, which will greatly reduce our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions profile, which I think is really exciting. And it's new, it's got a lot of momentum behind it. And this model has been very successful in places like California, but it's definitely a first time for New Hampshire. So definitely track that as it moves forward. Other things that we do that, you know, in this office that I'm engaged with, that's pretty cool, is like land conservation efforts. So, you know, I help guide the commission or the Conservation Commission on how to apply our conservation fund to protect lands, whether it's public lands or private conservation easements, to make sure that we have pockets of forest and wetlands and areas in Dover, which is, you know, a primarily urban environment, that are protected forever. So this, you know, through perpetual protection, we're making sure that we have pockets of carbon sequestration, areas for wildlife corridors, and all of these things that make our ecological health a lot better in the municipality. I don't know, there's plenty of other stuff. Obviously, public outreach is super important. So I've been working to redesign a Resilient Dover webpage, which has a lot of different resources for the community. And we recently hired an outreach coordinator in our department, which is super exciting. So we've been able to interface pretty regularly and helping to spread information to the public, for example, on how to reduce reliance on single-use plastics, how to take advantage of opportunities for public transport or our greenways, through our community trail, things like that. So there's a whole mix of stuff. I could talk for a really long time, so I'm going to cut myself off, but I'm happy to answer questions and go into any of these subjects further.
Great, thanks, Jackson. I want to highlight your one example of the EVs. A lot of people might say, well, that's really all about sort of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and it certainly is. And it's a really viable solution for that. However, at the same time, it requires us to think very differently about making our grid more reliable. And ultimately, we got to figure out where to store renewable energy. And a part of that can be in all those really big, essentially, our vehicles are just going to be mobile batteries going forward. Right. And so EVs for me are one of those great examples that is like a fully cross-cutting topic that connects mitigation and adaptation. So thanks for bringing that up. Alex, over to you. How you sort of going from implementation probably to policies now, but give us your perspective from your experiences.
Yeah, so as a consultant, I was doing very direct resilience work, I feel. I worked very closely with climate scientists, engineers, planners, and a lot of what we did was draft climate adaptation plans. And so it's really a grueling process where you have to get into the nitty-gritty of what it looks like to adapt an area for climate change. And so consultants have a hand in everything. I had to do things from running an economic analysis to GIS mapping, running different climate models. And a lot of the climate models are maybe flawed or contradictory. So looking at some of the overlap and trying to get some consensus was often kind of tricky. Looking into policy around emergency planning, such as like what are the requirements that a municipality has to meet in order to get future funding. And so there was often a lot of research on what other governments are doing, ways that they could work on securing funding for their projects, what are the different natural hazards that they could experience based on their geography, on how we see the climate models working in terms of rain, sea level rise, different kinds of patterns like that. And so it was very specific to each place. For example, I worked on a project for the city of Honolulu that was a climate adaptation plan on the surface, but it was actually a massive undertaking. It was huge document at the end because we had to essentially create a step-by-step guide for them on how to integrate resilience strategies into every part of their governance. And essentially these local governments, and you might hear this from other folks, they don't always have the manpower, or maybe they don't feel that they have the knowledge base necessarily to make an entire climate adaptation plan on their own. And so that's when my company would be able to step in and help fill that gap. But it's important to recognize that local governments often want to create climate adaptation plans because it helps in the future with securing FEMA grant funds. So if there's some kind of natural disaster that occurs in an area, it's really helpful to have that kind of documentation because that can help with like efforts afterwards in terms of trying to secure rebuilding funding and try to create like more resilient structures after a disaster. There were some issues with equity that I found in some of my projects because I was part of such a large company, international company. They only took clients that could pay enough for the project to be worth it, which makes sense as a business model. But there's a huge issue when it comes to resilience planning with smaller communities, poor communities, or other kinds of like historically marginalized communities like tribal governments, being able to afford to put together a climate adaptation plan. And then it can kind of become a vicious cycle where because they can't afford to put together the climate adaptation plan, they now don't necessarily have the documentation and the resources to get that FEMA funding if there is a disaster or to help them mitigate any potential disasters. So then it becomes a vicious cycle where there's a lot of deterioration issues and they're not able to pay for them to build resilience in the future. So it's difficult when you're working as a consultant because your job is to be there for your client. You're not necessarily an activist or an advocate. Like you have to work on behalf of their interests. And so sometimes it would be helpful for us to try to take a more equity view where we would do like a socioeconomic analysis of an area or try to understand some of the demographics to see if there are vulnerable communities that would be affected. But like in the case of Honolulu, or in the case of like we did a project for a community in California, it's like pretty affluent in a lot of the areas. And so it's like hard to really bring in that lens and make that viable for the client to think it's worth our time. But now as I'm going into a more generalist urban planning position, I don't have that technical focus on climate adaptation. But Maryland has a new climate action plan, and my office has communicated that they're really excited to have me check it out and to see how we can bring some of the work that Maryland's been doing around climate into our practices. So I'll be looking a lot at development plans, and I've already made like a a personal plan to really push for them to start evaluating developments for their resilience to climate change, and make that more of a priority. So yeah, there's ways to kind of balance it, even though it's more of a policy role.
Well, thanks, Alex. And I think to some extent, you've answered a little bit of Peter's question that he dropped in the chat. I have so many more questions for you, but I also notice, as I suggested in my email, that the time would fly by. And so I do want to transition to questions from the fellows. And I think Joe Field has a great question for Jackson, but I think it's a good question for all of you. And Alex, you were beginning to address this, but Joe asks, I'd love to hear more how equity fits into your climate resilience plan you're currently working on, given that Dover is a pretty affluent city with arguably more capacity to work on these things compared to other municipalities in New Hampshire. And I want to say, Joe, I think a really insightful question. And there's this underlying issue across New England that we kind of have one or two big cities and a whole bunch of small towns. And these small towns rarely have the capacity to deal with these big challenges. And this is like, we are not going to answer this question today, but there's the resilience piece broadly, and then there's the equity piece in particular. So anyway, Jackson, I want to throw that over to you to start. And then the rest of the panelists, please feel free to jump in.
Sure. No, I appreciate that question. I think it's such an important consideration. And I completely acknowledge the fact that a place like Dover does have more resources available than other communities. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of communities can't afford to have a position like mine to focus on this type of stuff. But that's why, you know, they're able to take advantage of, fortunately, regional planning commissions. A Stratford Regional Planning Commission, for example, does tons of great work. We're securing grants and helping smaller communities reach their goals. And that's why, you know, I'm involved with something like SRPC's resiliency subcommittee, so that I can help provide some perspectives on what I'm doing here and help provide guidance to these smaller communities on how they might be able to implement something in a similar fashion. So that's sort of getting at that piece. On the equity piece, there was a project that just is coming or wrapping up, which is the Dover Equity Project, which was something where we worked with Stratford Regional Planning Commission on. And so they've provided us with recommendations through an implementation table, where they have, you know, the recommendation, a few actions associated with that recommendation, and then basically like a feasibility score of how this group that worked on this project, how feasible they think it is for Dover to implement some of these things. And it covers a wide variety of topics, but I think that's going to be incredibly useful for us as a department and city staff as whole to, you know, really incorporate equity into all of the work that we're doing. It will certainly be an important piece to the citywide resilience plan that I put out from this department. But one example would be making sure that like capital improvements projects go forward in an equitable manner and aren't leaving behind some of the most vulnerable parts of our community or vulnerable, you know, pockets within our community. So yeah, that's barely scratching the surface, but I just want you to know that we are actively thinking about this. I'm really excited to fully dive into this report that like just came out this week and start incorporating equity more. Yeah, I think we incorporated some already, but even more so based on these findings.
Thanks, Jackson. I would add from my perspective of sort of being in the climate change trenches for well over 3 decades, that one of the things that really gives me hope are the people on this panel is that you've all been brought up now to better understand and appreciate diversity, equity, and inclusion issues and systematic racism. And so just the fact that you're in these positions gives me hope. And Andrea already talked about, you know, how she's looking through the equity lens when it comes to waste. So that we can get to a few more questions. I see that Kampa, is that pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, my name is Kampa Stempel, and I'm a graduate student at Arizona State University, and I'm doing my fellowship this summer with Impacts Asset Management. I just have a question about, I guess, how you all think about resilience. Anybody can answer it. And my question, I think, stems from a paper that Sarah Miro wrote in 2016. If anybody of you are familiar with her, she's a research person out here at Arizona State who did some work with urban resilience, but she just really argued and stated that resilience needs to be critically thought about both in positive contexts and in negative contexts. And so resilience is generally thought about as a really, really good thing. Like, we want resilient infrastructure, we want resilient governance systems. But like, for example, I have a colleague that is looking at how settler colonialism is thriving and is a resilient system in academic and educational institutions. So how are you thinking about resilience as a bad thing, or can be a bad thing, and how do you address those systems?
Great, I'll open that up for anybody who wants to take it on.
Huge question, so take it where you want.
I'm happy to start. I really like your framing of this question. This is really interesting. I personally see resilience as helping to protect like social, cultural, and kind of survival necessities, like access to running electricity, running water, making sure that like those are taken care of. I don't necessarily see resilience as let's preserve like the sprawling mansions that we have across the country and like how inefficient and consumptive they are at like the cost of like less affluent communities that like aren't able to create that resilience. Like I definitely understand that there can be like this problematic view of resilience of let's uphold the status quo in the way that we've been existing, which got us into this situation in the first place. And so I think the more that we can question that and approach resilience from a very like cultural and social perspective, especially when it comes to things like managed retreat, where you have like Indigenous Alaskan communities that are trying to move holistically away as a community, and see maybe resilience from that standpoint, as they see resilience as being part of a collective rather than maintaining a problematic building. And so I really appreciate that question. That's just how I see it.
I think I'd just jump in here and add, because Alex, you talked about FEMA before. You know, one of the things we're seeing is it's those more affluent communities that have the capacity and the skills to they become much more successful at getting FEMA grant dollars and other federal grant dollars to address issues. And so like from the beginning, the way that our government is set up, it's actually, your point is well taken, is that if we don't pay attention to the way that we rebuild, we can actually enhance those inequalities that exist in society without really thinking about how we can use resilience to actually grow equality. Any of the other panelists want to take a shot at this? All right, we do another question out there. So Madeline, over to you. I think you're still muted.
There we go, that's better. My question will be excuse me, a little less thought-provoking than Compaz, but I was kind of wondering, for like everyone on the panel who does outreach, what do you find the best ways to reach the people in these communities, especially the communities that are more low income and struggling a little bit more in finding that inclusion for them?
Excellent
question. I can take this first because this is really what I do. I have found that working with community organizations is like the best thing that you can do, is like really partnering and being close to the organizations that are really truly like a part of people's lives every day. And actually a lot of that knowledge that I have from Boston community organizations is from Fresh Truck, because Fresh Truck partnered up with a lot of different community organizations servicing those Boston communities that may be more food insecure, maybe more low income, more communities of immigrants, communities of people of color. And those communities are typically more marginalized and have also experienced disproportionate effects of waste specifically. So I think that partnering with community organizations, again, making sure that all of the information that we're putting out is accessible and can be read by the different people of Boston. And also I've created some videos. People really like videos, and also translating those videos. But I think the best thing is like getting close with the organizations that like play instrumental roles in Bostonians' lives every day, like BCYF, which is like a community family organization. And then also like food pantries often give out a lot of information, which is really helpful. And then also just like neighborhood associations and different groups like that.
Excellent. I could not agree more, Andrea. It's don't try to reach everybody as individuals, but work through those trusted organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Other panelists want to chime in on that question? All right, moving right along. Arti, over to you.
Hi, thank you for the amazing conversations. I have a question from Alexandra. All my previous work has been around community and international development in India, but now I am transitioning towards corporate sustainability because I feel after working for like quite a lot in government and international organization, I want to take leap to the corporate world, which has a lot of potential, I feel, because they have the most money you really need to actually bring change, and at the same time, they are one of the most, they are the people who are actually causing damage to the environment the most. So in my own way, I feel I want to be part of it. But because you said that you left consulting was not your kind of thing, I really want to know your perspective on that, because I see myself getting into corporate world after I graduate. So I would like to hear more about that from you.
Yeah, I'm happy about being really transparent about not liking things you've done and changing that. I feel like we should normalize that. So I'm happy to talk about that, and I'm happy to talk like individually too, if that's more helpful. But I think it depends where you are and what company you're with. I mean, if you're with a really large scale consultant, it's really intense and demanding, and you're often hopping between like a lot of different projects, such as like I did a lot of work on greenhouse gas mitigation for USDA. I did that one day, and then the next day I'm writing a climate adaptation plan. And it's just like using different parts of your brain, you like are thrown into new situations. So it depends what you're looking for, who you are as a person. Maybe you enjoy that kind of constant change. But I think if you're with a smaller company, then maybe you can grow with a client and you can like have that consistency where you work very closely with them. And I've worked for a consultant before where that was what my work life looked like, and it was actually really enjoyable. So it kind of depends where you are. I don't think all companies are the same. So I'm happy to talk about it more if you want to connect.
So Arti, I'd love to jump in here because I don't think about the University of New Hampshire as a company, but I can tell you sometimes it feels like I'm working with a company, even though I am doing the work I love, and I've been doing it for well over 30 years. And yet there is not a week that goes by that I'm not frustrated or disappointed by some aspect of the institution that I'm part of. And so that's going to be a reality, right? The grass is always going to be greener. And but I am sure every one of our panelists would talk about how they love their jobs, and there's this other thing in my job that I don't like. And so it's really, the balance is really important. You always need to be getting more out of, I would argue you need to be getting more out of what you're doing than less. But I'd encourage you not to seek perfection, because it just doesn't exist. And that's part of being social animals and having a diversity of ideas. And at the very least, that your thoughts and your work is respected, and that can happen in the corporate world, in the municipal world, and when you're working for yourself, hopefully with your spouse at home. So thanks for that, Alex. I think we have time maybe for one or two more questions if anybody has some. If not, I would love to do a lightning round with the panelists, which means really short answers. And this is going to be one of my longer questions, but we've run out of time. But I really, as we look to the future, I really just want you to sort of name and maybe describe in less than a sentence, sort of a big challenge that you see in building resilience, and then a big opportunity. And why don't we go back to the way we started? Alex, why don't we start with you? Big challenge in resilience and a big opportunity.
Do you mean like within my work or as a field as a whole?
I'm thinking a little bit more broadly, sort of in the field of you know, we're looking at public policy. So in the broader field. So for the Eastern Seaboard, for the United States, for the state of Maryland, opportunities and challenges.
Yeah, I see a challenge that the environmental field, I feel, just encounters a lot, which is like essentially greenwashing. But I think there's this new kind of greenwashing that's resilience washing, where like you have these like huge buildings that are developing like right along the shoreline that are really just like not good places, but they're like, oh, but I'm like well over like the seaboard and we're resilient and you don't have to worry. Nah, not really. So I think being very critical minded about some of these projects that are claiming to be resilient is so important for our profession, really important. I think an opportunity is, I feel when it comes to local, state, federal governments, like now is the time to keep applying pressure to all levels of governance. Like public figures are so much more receptive to addressing resilience more than ever. And I think that a lot of constituents don't realize their power in pushing their local government. If you see that they don't have a climate adaptation plan, why not like bring that up to them and start pushing for them to make one?
Great, thank you. Jackson, over to you.
Sure, yeah, there's so many things that I think are challenges and opportunities, but working for local government in the state of New Hampshire, I would say one of the biggest challenges is not having enacting legislation on a state level and really wanting to push initiatives, changes to our code and ordinances forward that sometimes we just legally do not have the authority to do what we would like to do in this community. And that can make it really difficult. But I agree with you that if you band together as a collective of communities, if you have a lot of stakeholders from your communities come forward and submit testimony on different issues, that can make a really powerful change, and we're starting to see some of that change happen now. So I think that that's really exciting. And very briefly, I think another one of the, so that's a challenge and an opportunity in a way. And one of the other challenges and opportunities, I think, is how we're going to deal with stormwater in the coastal watershed and our reductions of our stormwater impacts. We have MS4 from the EPA that's going to be coming down on all these communities, and it's going to be very difficult to figure out how to equitably come up with funding mechanisms to improve our infrastructure to deal with these problems, which I think it's really positive that we're going to reduce our impacts on the environment, but it's also a huge challenge to secure those dollars and make sure that we're not disproportionately impacting people that are having trouble living here to begin with.
Thanks, Jackson. Andrea, over to you.
I think a challenge that I am experiencing in the waste field in general is going to be with finding spaces to compost compostable materials. It's compost in food waste is one of the largest parts of the largest by weight parts of what gets sent to waste energy facilities and burned. And it's like a really good resource. But the issue is that there's not really, especially in urban environments, there's not really the space to be composting natural compost in windrows. And a way that we're working with that right now is we're sort of diversifying where we're going to be sending our food waste. We're going to send half of it to anaerobic digestion and the other half to regular composting. And I don't know if you guys are composting experts, but there's some tensions and definitely some tensions around anaerobic digestion. So I think that expanding the capacity to like do natural composting is like a challenge, but also an opportunity that the city is working on. So I think it's pretty cool.
And then John, we haven't heard from you in a while, so you get to wrap it up here.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is effective communication. It's something that encompasses every aspect of building resiliency, communicating climate change, passing legislation, developing new policy, starting from the grassroots, getting the people involved, engaging with your local municipalities. That all involves effective communication. And if you can master that, you can accomplish a lot of work. We've seen, municipalities that are really good at communication, creating accessibility through their programs, and their work is shown throughout the entire state, which is really great. Portland and South Portland in Maine here are a great example. They've developed a lot of great climate action plans. One Climate Future, they're creating accessibility communication methods through their website, and really honing in on, how can you communicate a lot of this information that needs to happen to the people that can make it happen. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is mastering that. And then, one of the biggest opportunities is that this is an insanely fast growing field. There is a lot of spotlights on this work right now. Everybody is trying to develop a climate action plan, adaptation strategies, building resiliency for their communities. Everybody wants to make this a priority right now. And, at least in Maine, there's a lot of money. The federal government has, passed infrastructure law that is funneling a ton of money for EV infrastructure development, the expansion of state fleets to electrify municipal fleets, rebates for passenger cars. There's a lot happening in this field right now. And it's really cool to see so many people that are so interested in, pursuing this work after graduation, because there's opportunity. And so that makes me hopeful that, there's going to be so many engaged people in this line of work.
Great. Thank you so much, John. We're going a little over time, but if you can bear with me, I'd really appreciate it. I'm going to pass it back to Alexis in a second. But for all of you still with us, if you could just, first of all, let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Really well done. Really great to hear about all the wonderful work you're doing and your thoughtful perspectives. All the people who are participating, I'd love if you could just go into the chat and just write in a word or two or a short phrase of something you learned or something that you appreciated, or just give thanks, but just drop it all in there. We'll watch that waterfall out. Again, thank you, panelists. Really appreciate you participating. And then Alexis will just close us out and remind us of our next webinar.
Excellent. Thank you, Cameron. And thank you so much to our 4 panelists for volunteering your time to come join us today and spend time with our fellows and other students and alumni. So just want to remind the fellows, we do have a professional development session next Thursday, but for those of you, and that's just for the fellows, for those of you who are interested in joining the next alumni webinar panel, that is going to be on June 23rd at 1 p.m., where we will be discussing sustainable development within social justice. So we hope to have you join us then. And I just love seeing that the chat is flying. So thank you all for sharing with us. And hopefully I heard some people say that they might connect after, even within the panelists. So I hope you guys network after this. And then of course, any of the fellows who have questions, we linked everyone's LinkedIn in the email yesterday. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.